missing.
Thank you.
Got it? Okay. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, all jurors and alternates are present. Mr. Durst is present with Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin. We have Mr. Millius, Mr. Lewin, Mr. Balian, and Mr. Henderson. We have Mr. Lewis also representing the defendant, who is present. Mr. Millius, are you ready to continue with the people's argument?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
You may.
All right, when I left off yesterday, we talked about briefly the lie that was going to be, but was ruined by the body coming up, and then the new lie that was going to take shape, which was self-defense. Now, what I'm about to tell you isn't rocket science. Use this every day in your ordinary life when you evaluate anything. You're going to get jury instruction that basically says the same thing, but how do you know if a story is a lie? And I think it's common sense. You look at, does a story on its face make sense? Is it supported or refuted by evidence? Has the person telling this story repeatedly lied? And fourth, is there a motivation to lie or tell the truth? And I want to make real clear, our position is Durst is not a pathological liar. He is not. He lies because he has a motivation. And the motivation is very obvious. Here, in this case, it's to avoid the consequences for doing 3 murders. But there have been times that you've heard about where he's been brutally honest. Like in 2010, when he was talking about the domestic violence with Kathy. Now, why was he brutally honest in 2010 about the domestic violence? Motivation, the fourth thing we talked about. He was being interviewed by Andrew Jarecki. He's not in a court setting where there's an actual consequence, and he was being asked about something many, many, many years after it had happened, and in a setting where he wasn't going to be charged with anything. Now, when it came to actually something he would face consequences about in 2010, like talking about the murders, he denied it. But when we talked about something like physical violence, domestic violence, abuse, that type of stuff, honest. Because he had no motivation to lie at that point. How do we know he was also telling the truth? In addition to not having a motivation to lie during that interview, we also look at the physical evidence. Like I said in point 2, is it refuted or supported by independent evidence? And when he talked about the emotional and physical abuse that Kathy went through, that's supported by a host of witnesses who said basically the same thing. Now, there have been a ton of lies that you've heard from Durst, particularly on the stand. And why is that? It's a motivation. He's trying to avoid the consequences, like I said, of 3 murders. There's a lot of lying because there's a lot of evidence. It's also in the nature of the way that he lies. It's very particular. And I'll get to that a little later, but I want to talk about first Durst's veracity, telling the truth. And as Mr. Balian talked about before, you take the stand, you take an oath. It's a solemn oath. It's a promise to tell the truth. And it's really a promise to you. You're the truth, the fact finders. You decide what is true. And when someone takes a stand, they're making a promise to you, they're telling the truth. And they break that promise if they lie to you. And what has he said about lying under oath?
Would you lie under oath to help your case?
Yes.
The question is, did he lie to the Galveston jury? And this is what he said.
The 2 times I committed perjury had to do with telling the court in Galveston that I was in Northern California and I was in Southern California.
So as a basic premise, We know he would lie to that, he did in fact lie to that Galveston jury and would lie to that Galveston jury. Next question is, would he lie to you? What has he said?
And I think you said that as an example, you have only lied about a couple of things. Is that correct?
I thought we were talking about the Galveston trial.
Now I'm talking about your trial here.
I lied about several things.
And when you say several things, Mr. Durst, would you agree that several is more likely many?
Overruled.
I would say 5.
And on the fundamental issue for which I am talking to you about whether or not he would tell the truth or lie to you, about whether or not he killed or murdered Morris Black, this is what he said.
Let me ask you, Mr. Durst, if you had murdered Morris Black, would you tell us?
No.
Okay, one of the things that I talked about is whether or not evidence supports what your testimony is. And we look to independent evidence for that. So, for example, if a week from now somebody says, hey, Ethan, on this particular date, we're accusing you of having committed a murder at this particular time. It's like 9:25. Well, obviously, all of you, everyone in here would be a witness, an independent witness, independent of anything I said, and there's video evidence of it. It would say, hey, yeah, clearly I did not commit the murder at that time because I'm here. Couldn't have. I have all this independent evidence. But that's very different than someone who weaves a story to account for evidence against them, right? And there's a distinction between the two. And let me give you an example. In opening statement, Mr. Lewin talked about the importance of cell phone data, right? And what we basically said is that Durst turned off his cell phone when he came to California. He did not use his cell phone at all, so that there would be no evidence tracking him from going from Northern California down to Southern California. And the motivation there is very obvious. Like, he didn't want to be traced to Southern California where he was going to kill Susan. And there were cell phone logs that basically say that, and that was all introduced in opening. And having seen that, when Durst testified, he said, on the flight from San Francisco, I misplaced my cell phone. So basically, he said he accounted for that lack of cell phone use by saying that the cell phone was misplaced. Now, if anybody said to you, hey, that confirms the story, that the physical evidence, the independent evidence confirms the story, that's not what it's doing. He's actually listening to the evidence and changing his story or creating a story to account for that evidence. They're entirely different things. The example that I gave with me, with independent evidence, and creating a story to account for the evidence. And that's important because this is not trial by surprise. What we have, the prosecution has, the defense gets. It's not a surprise. It's just a question of there's tons of evidence, whether or not you have the time to look through everything and whether or not you understand its importance. Now, in terms of preparing for trial in Galveston, I'll talk to you about the BD story. And the BD story is basically a script. And Durst ends up being the actor. Now, he talked a lot about how there's debate of whether or not he wrote it or someone else wrote it. But if you look at the document, and I'm going to skip that, is if you look at the document, it was clearly created in anticipation of trial. The language in it, if you look at it, like the DA knows that on 8/30/01 I bought the .22 pistol in Pasadena. It is talking about things that are present, not past, right? It's not saying the DA had known. It's talking about the DA currently knows. And it's also talking about that concept that I talked about earlier about weaving a story. It's saying this is the physical evidence out there, this is the independent evidence, and this story has to account for that physical evidence, that independent evidence, in order to make it make sense. And there are countless examples throughout the BD story of language like that. The DA knows this, the DA knows this. And as I said, it's basically a script. Here's an example, and you'll have tons of them. January 9th, 2011. And this particular entry in the BD story talks about how the defendant learned about the death of Susan Berman. Of course, this is a lie, but this is part of the script that he's going to tell. And all the information about the people that he learned, what he learned from Susan Berman's death and who he learned it from, Julie Baumgold and Nick Chavin, and when he learned it, are all contained in the BD story. And then you see it reflected again about in the actual testimony in Galveston. So you see the script, and then it plays out in the trial. And he talks about who exactly he heard the information from and what exactly they said, and it's identical to the BD story. Now, a little bit about telling a story. Quentin Tarantino is a film writer and director. I love film and television, so I'm going to spend a little time talking about that. If you guys don't know him, he wrote and directed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or Inglourious Basterds. He's probably one of the geniuses of our generation in terms of filmmaking. He started his career with a movie called Reservoir Dogs, and it's brilliant. It's also very violent, so if you're not into violence, don't watch it. But there is a scene in it that is super famous, and it's taught in almost every film writing class, and it's called the Commode Story. And it's about basically Commode is bathroom, and it's a story that happens about a bathroom. And the premise of this story is essentially this. Tim Roth, the actor right here in the middle, is an undercover officer. And he's tasked with infiltrating a robbery crew. And that robbery crew is violent. And if he isn't able to infiltrate it, he's not going to be able to stop that robbery crew and potentially stop a bunch of murders. That's his task. And his handler, who is off to the left, the detective who basically is a supervisor, he tells Tim Roth, he says, look, in order for you to get in with this crew, to gain their confidence, you have to tell a story. You have to essentially tell a lie. And the stakes are high, right? If he doesn't get in with the crew, in other words, the motivation, he's not going to be able to stop the robbery. And if they find out he's lying, they're going to kill him, right? You can't have higher stakes than that. And what his handler says is you need to have this story. And the story is all about the details. It's the details that sell the story, right? It is what makes the story come to life. And that's why I'm reminded of Durst taking a stand and testifying, is that his lie, the way he lies, is he has vivid details, and lots of them. And it almost makes it makes it come to life, and it almost makes it seem real, but almost. Now, the problem with details is this. The more details you have, the harder it is to lie, ultimately, because you have so many details, you have to keep track of them so that they don't contradict each other. The other issue with details, and they're great for a movie, but when you take the stand, it's different because there's someone cross-examining you. And if you tell the details, you add all these details, eventually those details will come in conflict with independent evidence, like we talked about. And the classic example in this case is the day planner, Susan's day planner. If the story had just been, look, I went out and a surprise visit to Susan and I came back, without all these details, it wouldn't have been contradicted by that day planner. So the very thing that makes his story more interesting or more lifelike is the very thing that makes it more dangerous in terms of being undermined, is the details. Now, the other thing about the details, and it's part of the scene as well, is that the handler tells Tim Roth's character, with the details, you got to know them. You got to practice it, you got to say it, and this is this quote, and the only way to do that, my brother, is to say, to keep saying it. Say it, say it, say it, say it. Which means practice, practice, practice. Own that story so that you know every detail. And now in Galveston, that's a lot easier because the world of evidence is much smaller. But for us, it's much bigger. We're talking about 3 murders, not 1. And you're talking about a lot more testimony over the course of a lot of time. And that is a monumental task to remember. So, rehearsal, practice, practice, practice. Durst practiced in Galveston his testimony. And we know this, we've heard it in a number of ways, but one of the things he did is he audio taped himself and gave it to his friend, Stuart Altman, and gave it to his wife and said, hey, does this sound believable? This is what the call sounded like.
You know the stuff you're sending to Stuart?
Yes.
To tell me a little bit more, it sounds A+. Do I sound 100% believable?
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
believe me?
Yes.
And the tone of my voice sounds sincere, and
Yes.
that's what I want to know about, those type of things. That's why I'm doing it. Do I sound like someone who's describing this situation?
Yes.
Well, only you and Stuart, you know, can I do this with? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And this is, but don't you see how important that is to me to know that?
Yeah, but I think that
It's a risk, but leaving out the risk, don't you think it's good for me to know that you and Stuart say, yes, you sound the way you should sound? Don't you think that helps me?
So basically what you have is an actor rehearsing his lines, practicing for the day that he'll be in trial. Remember, those details, the lies, there are a lot of them, and you have to make sure that they stay, that you remember them, and they don't conflict with each other, and they don't conflict with the evidence. And the only way you can do that is practice. And like I said, in Galveston, smaller world, a lot easier to do. And you also heard how Durst practiced with a jury consultant. He got advice on how to talk with a jury.
Well, Ms. Durst, having you previously stated, isn't it your word that you have said in the past that you spent time with Robert Hirschhorn, your jury consultant, not just going over what happened, but practicing your testimony, correct?
Practice for the direct examination.
Okay. If the BD story is a script, then the main scene of this is the actual shooting of Morris Black. And this is how Robert Durst explained what happened in 2010.
What was the basic idea of how you were going to get off in Galveston, if you were?
How I was going to get acquitted, what my story was going to be, what my case was going to be. The best case was immediately, I mean, the other lawyers who came to see me, Mike Kennedy, who's a well-known New York criminal lawyer.
I apologize, guys. That ended up having the wrong clip in there. Okay, this is basically what he said. And I put it as a transcript, and you can look at it. He basically says he was in the apartment, I can hear the TV, he goes in. And there, when you look at what he said, on its face, it doesn't make sense. Like, why is Morris in the room? Like, if this is all you had, this explanation of what happened, you'd be like, wait, I don't get it. Like, why is Morris in your house? Why does he have a key? Why is he making other keys? What is he doing with your gun? Why does he have your gun and it's hidden under a jacket? Why, when you ask about the gun, does he pull it out and start to make a motion like it's going in your direction? And if he's your friend, why is he doing any of that? And why do you suspect that this is something dangerous? None of it makes sense on its face. The only way you can make sense of it is create an elaborate backstory. And a backstory, in terms of telling a story, is to give motivation, to give context to why something is, right? And Durst gives an elaborate backstory. His backstory essentially is to create an image of Morris that he is absolutely dangerous with a gun. Totally dangerous. So that when Morris holds a gun, oh, you absolutely have to engage with him and grapple with him so that you don't get hurt. The problem with that backstory is there's no evidence of it. There's not a single witness that can testify about it. Nothing. Let's go through that backstory. First part about that backstory is that they went out shooting at an isolated island. Again, going out shooting, they don't go to a shooting range in the story where you'd have a lot of witnesses. They go to a place where there's conveniently no one there, right? There's nobody who can substantiate this other than Durst, right? He's the sole source of this evidence. And in that story is basically that Morris started shooting the gun and he was out of control and he basically was swinging the gun all over the place. And that's clearly dangerous. But there is no evidence that that ever happened. Next part. This is what he says happened on September 17, 2001. They're in the house together, the apartment, and Morris has the eviction letter, and Durst has walked into the bathroom. He's coming out of the bathroom. Morris has the gun, and he shoots at the eviction letter. That's the story. Of course, that's incredibly dangerous, right? Shooting in a house, you should never do, right? Particularly shooting a house in the direction of someone else. But again, there's no evidence that's ever happened other than from Durst. Lewin likes to point out that if you're shooting an eviction letter at close distance, you'd likely hit it. There's no damage to the eviction letter. Lewin also pointed out that if you listen to the testimony on cross-examination the last week, or it was actually direct testimony, if you listen carefully, it does sound a lot like when Durst is talking about the bullet. He's asked about the bullet that Morris shot and then got wedged into the wall. That it sounds like he says, I shot the bullet. Let's listen. I'm going to turn it up to make sure you got it.
The second time that Morris Black fired the gun in the apartment, where did the bullet go?
I don't know. I shot at a box that the microwave came in.
Did that have styrofoam and other sort of packaging in it?
Yeah.
Now, even if you say to yourself, like, maybe he misspoke. He meant to say he, right? Morris, he. And he misspoke, he said I. The fact that there's a bullet lodged in the apartment isn't evidence of his story. That equally could be evidence that Durst shot at Morris. He knew where the bullet would be, and he was able to say that's where the bullet was. There's no evidence that there was actually a shooting on that day in the way that Durst described it. Now, the second part about this story is that he says after the shooting, he went up to Morris and said, you can't do that, and demanded back his key. He said, you can't be in here, you can't shoot, give me back the key. And he got the key back. Now, in 2010, when he was interviewed by Jarecki, and he was asked about that particular incident, he said the first time he shot it, I didn't take the key away from him. It's a key inconsistency when he's asked to repeat the story. There's no evidence in the second time he tells the story, or in the second time he tells the story, he says, I did not ask for the key. I mean, this is what happens when you tell a lie over and over, and there's so many details, you can't keep track of all the details, and he starts losing the details. Okay, let's talk about the second shooting in the apartment. He says he went for a jog, started at the temple, went for a jog, back to his apartment. When he got to the apartment, he could hear the TV inside. He opened the door, and he saw Morris inside. And he said, hey, I took away the key the last time, you gotta give it back to me. You're not supposed to be in here. So Morris gives back the key, and then, just like the previous account, Durst says he goes into the bathroom, and when he comes out, Morris shoots the gun into the kitchen. And then he says, you can't do that. And he demands the key back. He says, give me back the key. Now, if you were paying attention there, you would notice he said, give me back the key, and received the key 2 times in the story. Once in the beginning and once in the end. And obviously, you can't have been given the key twice, right? It doesn't make sense. And he was called out on this on cross-examination. And the prosecutor in Galveston said, hey, that's a conflict. You can't have both of those things. Like, he has a key, he either gave it to you when you first got in there or after the shooting when you kicked him out. It can't be both, right? And he admits, yeah, that's a conflict. But his explanation for what happened is one of the most ridiculous things. Yeah, it's a conflict, but I remember them both. That's his explanation. Now, on the stand, he describes that second shooting in the house that you guys heard, entirely different. And this is on direct examination. Entirely different.
Was there another occasion when Morris Black shot the gun in the apartment?
Yes,
Would you explain to the jury what happened that time?
about a week after the first time, I had done something in Houston and came back. And when I got back, Morris was in the apartment. And he was showing me how he could take the gun apart. I told him I did not want him to take the gun apart. And he should put it back together. So he put it back together, and then to show me that he put it back together correctly, he shot it at a box that was in the kitchen.
That story, the first time it ever happened, that permutation of it was in front of you. You can go listen to the Galveston testimony. There is no mention of disassembling a gun, putting it back together, and then shooting it to prove that it was shot. No mention. That never was mentioned once in Galveston. In the entire trial, not once. Not on cross-examination, not on direct, not at all. You also listen to like the details of that story, the way he told it to you on direct, is that it started off with them both being in the apartment at the same time. But you remember that what he said in Galveston is that he had gone for a jog and came back and heard the television on, and that's when he went in, right? And Morris was already there. Again, totally inconsistent. This, what he said to you, totally inconsistent with Galveston. Another issue. There are no witnesses to this event. There's not a key maker who says, yeah, I made copies of the key for Morris Black. There's not a neighbor who says, I heard a shot. Nothing. The only thing you have is Durst. It's the only source. And he has absolutely a motivation to lie about this. Okay, let's talk about Morris Black. Now, Morris Black was definitely a grouchy old man. It's not the type of guy I personally would like to have over for dinner. But a lot of his erratic behavior can definitely be explained by one thing. He was dirt poor. He was paranoid about people using the electricity in the park because he thought it would go on his bill. And you heard the testimony that was read to you about Klaus Stillman, who evicted Morris Black. And Morris, he didn't want to immediately have him out because he knew that that would mean that Morris was on the streets. Now, in Durst telling of Morris Black, he's an absolute danger with any firearm. Absolutely dangerous. He's actually like a greyhound for guns. You hide a gun in the apartment, he's going to go into your apartment and find it. But there is zero testimony in this case from anyone but Durst that Morris had an affinity for guns, that he had shot a gun, or that he was extremely reckless and dangerous with a gun. Nothing. Let's go to the day of the murder. Durst talks about the day of the murder, and he basically says that he parked his car at the temple and then drove to the temple and then jogged almost a mile to the apartment. Now, in Galveston, he said that basically left a little before 6 and arrived a little before 6:30. Here on direct examination, he said he arrived between 8 or 9. So obviously a conflict. And then he brought it back down to 6:30 on cross-examination. So again, timing, totally inconsistent. Let's talk about what he said. He said that essentially Morris was seated at that table and he turned towards him with the gun, and before he could point the gun at me, I grabbed the barrel of the gun over his hand like this, like that, before he could turn towards him. And he pointed to the animation in Galveston. The testimony in Galveston was, this is what happened. Durst said, that animation is what happened. And this section is essentially what it is, right? Morris is merely standing up, and at no point does the gun end up being pointed at Durst. Remember, the testimony of Durst in Galveston was, before the gun could be pointed at me, I grabbed it. Now let's hear what he said here to you guys.
Yes, I was looking in the boiler for the gun. The gun was not there. I said, Morris, give me the gun. I stood up. He took 1 or 2 steps towards me. I put my right hand up. He was holding the gun the way you hold the gun to shoot it.
Important inconsistency with the animation, Durst's testimony. In Galveston, with what he testified to you, there were no 2 steps. You watch the animation, Morris merely goes straight up. He does not step towards Durst. What else did he say here?
Where's it pointed?
He was pointing it in my direction.
When you say your direction, was it pointed like towards your face, towards your midsection? Do you remember?
My face.
Okay.
And that is a clear inconsistency with what he testified in Galveston. In Galveston, as I read to you, the testimony was very clear. Before the gun could be pointed at him, he grabbed the gun. But here he testified the gun was actually pointed directly at him. Let's talk about the grip on the gun. This is what he said to you guys.
If he came up from the table and came out around toward you, would you show the jury how you grabbed the gun?
I think the problem is, Your Honor, we've got no description.
If you look at it, he grabs it in this unique way, right? And look at it again. A little later in the trial, he was asked again. And this is how he.
How did you grab the gun? With your right hand?
Mr. Durst is grasping the right hand, the left thumb of the right hand.
With my right hand.
Okay, so each time he said that he held it in this way, right? With the finger over and basically the palm over the back of, in this case, DeGuerin's hand. But that's actually entirely different than the way that Dick DeGuerin held the gun, right? And it seems like a small point, but the way that Dick DeGuerin is holding the gun in this particular instance, your hand, or Dick's hand at this moment, is actually over the ejector slot for the semi-automatic pistol. The way that Durst is holding it, that part of the hand is on the back of would be on the back of Morris's hand. In which case, you wouldn't have a situation where you would get that pinching that he claims that he got. Additionally, the way that DeGuerin is holding the gun, you probably have a lot more leverage in terms of controlling that gun. Now let's talk about the physical evidence. Tom Bevel testified. Now, Tom Bevel testified in Galveston as well. But when he testified in Galveston, he testified primarily about the blood spatter being a consequence of being produced by a gun. He did not testify to the jury in Galveston about the animation or whether Durst's testimony was consistent with the physical evidence. Remember that the animation was introduced later in the trial. So he never saw it during the Galveston trial, nor did he hear the testimony of Durst when he testified about what happened. The first time he was able to do that was subsequently, and that's what he testified to. And when he actually looked at the physical evidence as it compared to the testimony of Robert Durst and the animation, this is what he said. Is this animation, this freeze frame of the animation, consistent with the evidence at the crime scene?
In my opinion, no.
And just to be clear, you're saying that this animation is not an accurate recreation of the crime scene?
That is correct.
And why did he say that? There are three major points he had. One, based upon the animation testimony of Robert Durst, you would have expected to find blood on the inside of the door frame, and there wasn't. Second, Morse's head would have been further to the right, based upon the blood spatter that was on the wall. And third, there would have been a blood on the gun from the back spatter because of how close they were. So basically, if you look at the animation, how close Morse's head was in the animation to the door frame would have yielded back splatter that would have gone 1 into the gun and 2 into the door frame. And 3, the head would have been further over, which would account for the blood spatter that was further over. And when Tom Bevel testified about the directionality, what direction that blood was coming, he said it was coming straight on. And if it was this far over to the left, it wouldn't create straight on but blood spatter. Okay, what about the gun? Well, the gun, Durst testified, didn't wipe it down, and he just threw it out. And you had a stipulation in this trial that the gun was recovered and that it was tested for blood, and there was no blood found on it. Right? No blood found on the gun. And Tom Bevel said, if that gun were that close, and there was back spatter, and there was back spatter, there would be blood on the gun. Okay, let's talk about Durst's hands. Because the defense is going to get up here and say, oh, that blister, obviously Durst's hand was on the ejector, he got caught there, and that's evidence that what he said is true. As I already said about the grip, there is a reason to doubt that. The second reason is what Mr. Balian said right before I went on. There is a host of reasons why you would have that, and this is what Dr. Ferrado said as well. Look, if you were chopping up a body, sawing it up, and the amount of labor it's labor intensive. And anybody who's used a handsaw before, you're sitting there going back and forth, and that's exactly the type of stuff that you would have in abrasion, right? Like that is. And Dr. Ferrado said, look, if you look at the nature of that, the healed wound at that part, there's no way you could say what that came from. Now, in opening statement, Dick DeGuerin also made a reference to the coroner and said that the coroner's testimony in Galveston was consistent with what Durst's testimony was. It's not. And basically what DeGuerin said is that that Durst's testimony is that that Morse was shot in the side of the nose, and that the coroner said there's damage, evidence of damage to the nose, and that's consistent. That's not what the coroner said. And to understand that, there's like 3 pages of testimony you guys heard about how Morse died, and the coroner basically was testifying about, look, we have a body, it doesn't have a head, and we're trying to ascertain how did that person die, and that it wasn't natural causes, right? And one of the ways that we know that how that person died is because there's blood inside the lungs. And that meant that there was some injury further up, that blood ended up coming down into the lungs. And what the coroner said, literally what the coroner said is, look, when a bullet hits your head, he didn't say your face, he said when it hits your head, you have very fragile bones in the base of your head and in your face. and that when that bullet hits your head, and he didn't clarify as to where, he just said generally, when the bullet hits your head, those bones, because they're so fragile, will fracture and break, and that will cause tearing, which will cause bleeding, and then you respirate that down your throat, basically into your lungs. There's no testimony from the coroner, zero, that there was evidence that he was literally shot in the side of the nose. There's zero testimony of that. Okay, let's talk about what Durst testified to afterwards, after the shooting, calling for help. He said that the first thing he does is run upstairs and try to knock on Maria de Enriquez's door. And you had a stipulation that Maria de Enriquez was there that morning. She was in her house, and she heard no knocking. She heard no screaming for 911, and if there had been knocking, she would have heard it. So the evidence is inconsistent with Durst's account of what he did afterwards. What does he say he did after that? Is that he ran down the street to the burger joint that was like basically 3 properties down to use a payphone there. And at the payphone, he encountered a woman with her child. And he's basically saying, hey, I gotta call 911. It's an emergency. 911, 911. And he's repeating it. And his story is she was non-responsive. I mean, come on, guys. First of all, that woman's never testified, and the description is like such a generic description that could be any woman. And to be honest with you, it is not a woman. It never happened. But the idea in America that you're yelling 911 and somebody doesn't understand you, one time, okay, fine. But he includes it twice, that there's a man standing next to the car, and he goes to the man and he says, hey, 911, I gotta call 911, help me, call 911. And that man is well as unresponsive. Doesn't say, hey, yeah, or whatever. Like 911 is about as clear a thing that is understood. That's an emergency, I need to use the phone, right? And yet, again, that person didn't testify. These fictional people that you see in the testimony are very similar to the testimony that we had about Susan, where every time you were asked for a witness that would substantiate your story, it's always reference to a dead person. Like, oh yeah, so-and-so, I told so-and-so. Well, that person happens to be dead. In Galveston, just references to people that were just generic and didn't exist and never would testify. Next, he says he goes down back towards the apartment, knocks on an apartment door, seeking help, and not surprisingly, no one answers. Of course, that neighbor never testified and said, yeah, I heard a knocking. He then says that, or the testimony then is that Maria Enriquez heard a slamming sound of a door, back and forth. She goes outside, looks down, and this is via stipulation, she looks downstairs, down that hallway, or that stairwell, and she sees Durst slamming the door. And basically what Durst is doing is he's slamming the door to account for the noise that he thinks someone might have heard from that sounded like a gunshot. Okay. One of the things that Durst says is that when he went for that walk, starting off at the temple and then jogging to the apartment to start off this day, that he left his cell phone in his car. Now there's so many things about that that are ridiculous. Anybody who is a cyclist or a jogger or runner or anything, the idea that you would drive to a location a half a mile or a mile away from your house and then run to your apartment or jog to your apartment and then jog and presumably stay in the apartment sweaty, do whatever you're going to do in the apartment, and then run back to your car makes zero sense. You didn't go for a jog, you park in front of your apartment, and you go for a jog to some location, then jog back. Like, that doesn't make any sense. The only reason why you have that there is really, it's just an excuse to say, I wasn't able to call 911 with my cell phone because I left it somewhere else. And if that sounds familiar, it is, because that's literally the same thing he said with Susan Berman. I lost my phone, I wanted to call 911, but I couldn't. Now, is there another explanation as to why he wouldn't have his cell phone on that particular day? Yeah, there is. And why you would actually park at the temple, far away from the location? Well, that explanation, if true that he did park at the temple, would be this. You didn't want your car in front of the apartment because you knew you were going to kill Morris Black, and you didn't want anything associated with you to be tied to that apartment. Same thing applies to the cell phone. You don't want to bring your cell phone to a crime scene because you could be tracked by your cell phone to that crime scene. So you want to leave your phone as far away from the crime scene as possible. Now, if that is true as well, you probably also want to be seen somewhere far away from the crime scene, like, say, a hotel, ordering room service on the day you killed your friend, and getting a haircut on the afternoon after you've killed your friend. These are things you would do if you wanted as many people to see you and be able to say, yeah, I was not here when Morris was killed somewhere else. What might you also do? Buy a bow saw from Chalmers, not on the day of the crime, but actually well before. Because of course you don't want to buy the bow saw the same day that you're killing Morris, right? And that's what the evidence so far in this case has been, is that he bought the bow saw well in advance. Okay. The ancients, they built structures. They wanted to build these giant structures for all the world to see. They wanted them to stand the test of time. They want people that could see them to see that they reached into the heavens, right? They didn't have modern architecture, and they built in the structure, the shape that would support as building as high as they could. And what they chose was the shape of a pyramid. It has a wide base and then builds up to a point, reaching up, so to speak, up to the heavens. And you see that in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Americas, in Japan. And an argument in a trial is very much like a pyramid. It's layers upon layers of evidence, witnesses, stacked on top of each other, each pointing upwards to a single point. And that point, in our case, is Robert Durst killed Susan Berman. Now, the defendant has his own version of a pyramid, except for his pyramid is inverted. It's upside down. And all the evidence that he states, all this wide base of evidence he talks about, all these witnesses, all this event, this backstory, all rests on it. Except for that the pyramid rests on a very precarious point, a tiny point. And what is that point? That's Robert Durst. Everything he said about Galveston rests on him. And he has every motivation to lie. In fact, he has lied over and over again. He's admitted that he's lied. And if you don't believe him, that entire story crumbles. And on its face, the story doesn't make sense. It's contradicted by the physical evidence, and his own credibility is destroyed. That story he told doesn't make sense. Let's talk about the missing head. Ben Hodges testified that if you went to the end of that pier and you threw a body out, that the tide and the depth of the bay on that, in that where Galveston is, that particular pier, is that the body parts would be pushed back along the coast. Everything. And that's where every body part, except for the head, ended up. And what did Ben Hodges, who makes statistical models of tides and currents, and what did he say? Look, the head would have been there. If you threw the head in there, it would have been with the other body parts. The only explanation as to why the head wasn't with the other body parts is either it was thrown in, washed back with the other body parts, and then someone decided to take him out, or it was never thrown in. Those are the only two things that could happen, according to Ben Hodges. Now, why would somebody go in and fish out the head? Right? Or why would they not throw the head in? What did Tom Bevel said? Would have had the head aided in the reconstruction of the crime scene? Yes. Robert Durst understood, and the only explanation is, for that missing head is that head tells a story. It is the head that Tom Bevel could have used to say, hey, this happened in a particular way. And the only reason why you would take that body part as opposed to all the body parts or one of the body parts, why not take an arm, a leg, a torso, but a head, because that's where he was shot. And if you could know where he was shot, you would know how it went down. And if you took the head, you can make any story of how it went down. And that's what he did. And even Durst agreed with that concept.
You would agree, Mr. Durst, that if they recovered Morris Black's head, that if you had shot him in the back of the head and not the front of the head, that would be revealed, correct?
Correct.
Okay, let's talk about motivation. And Mr. Balian spoke about the motivation before, and I'm going to just basically review some of the things that he said. And this is what Robert Durst said when he was talking to John Lewin in 2015.
It's very clear to me that what happened was Morris knew who you were. You haven't disputed that, right?
No, I denied it.
What's that? Yeah, no, and he knew who you were. And the problem with Morris was that Morris was pushy and a pain in the ass, and he was putting pressure on you to basically set him up, in a house with you.
Yes.
And this is what he said to you guys.
Well, when was the first time he saw you as Bob Durst? And not as Dorothy Siner with the witch?
Sometime in March or April.
All right. Did he make any remarks about that?
I told him that I sometimes wore a disguise as a woman because I just did not want to be me. And he said he went through that a while ago.
In other words, not wanting to be you, not wanting to be Bob Durst. Did you explain to him why you didn't want to be Bob Durst?
Primarily because of Janine Pirro.
Now, he tried to walk that statement back later on cross-examination, but it's entirely consistent with the evidence in the trial. And it just makes sense. Look, you're Morris Black. You're in an apartment in Galveston. And this guy moves in next door to you, right? The apartment right next to you. And that guy is dressed up as a woman. He's not just a woman, he's a mute woman. And he has a fake name. And it turns out, the more you get to know him, he's actually a millionaire. And he's given up a lifestyle of a millionaire to live in this apartment. And the more time you spend with him, the less he's disguised as a woman. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that guy is hiding from something. He's willing to give up a millionaire lifestyle to come down here, right? And if you're Morris Black and you're desperate because you're going to end up on the street, you're interacting with another desperate person. And that's Robert Durst. And in that period of time, Robert Durst was absolutely desperate. He was in incredible fear that he would be prosecuted for the murder of his wife because of the reinvestigation. And like I said, he went through all those things. And we both, they and us, basically agree on that. We both agree. There's a reinvestigation. He was absolutely in fear. Incredible fear. Dressed up as a woman, as a mute woman, gave up a millionaire's lifestyle, used different aliases. He was in absolute panic that he would be charged. Where we differ is this. We believe that he was so desperate, so in fear, that he would kill witnesses. They think he was only desperate enough to chop up a body. Ladies and gentlemen, The evidence shows overwhelmingly that he murdered Morris Black. Now, Mr. Balian is going to take over and talk to you about the rest of the case, and I appreciate your time with me. Give us a second, though, while we disconnect my computer, put in, or if now would be a good time for a break.
Yeah, let's take our break now.
Is it
Ladies
possible?
and gentlemen.
Never mind. Will it be a full 15 minutes or 10 minutes if we do, or?
Well, I think we'll take a regular break.
Okay.
All right?
Okay. Yes.
All right, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not murmur.